Thank you, Chair. I wanted to come back in on a couple of different things. First, going back to prisons and COVID, and I do think that the President did an exceptional job, particularly in the first wave, protecting people, prisoners and staff, in a very congregated setting, in an overcrowded congregated setting, from what could have been an absolute catastrophe, particularly in that first wave. It came at a significant price, though, and there's an opportunity to learn from that. You know, and going through all of the Inspector of Prison reports, it's clear that prisoners reported very significant information about how not to get it, but much less information about what to do if you had it, you know what I mean, and how that was managed. Very, very significant mental health impact from the isolation that was necessary, particularly in the first wave, and the missing of family visits. Now, there's an opportunity there, and indeed, if I can refer you to the staff survey that was done in 2021 by the Office of the Inspector of Prison, the staff themselves are recommending in-cell telephones and video calls to improve relationships with family members, to improve mental health. And there's obvious benefits in relation to education and training, access to mental health supports, which is a big problem irrespective of COVID. So, you know, that's coming from the staff. There's nothing sort of, sometimes you get criticised for providing services to prisoners. This is the staff recommendation, and I just want to amplify it from the staff survey. There's an ongoing concern about the mental health impact of the current quarantine experience, and you're aware of that, but I wanted to flag it to you because it's going to come back, and these things can come back in lots of different ways from a cost perspective to the state. The undoing of the directions, I think, you know, the directions that were possible under the Act, I think it was July 2021 before there was an actual direction given, but it's not clear what the sunset side of things on that are in relation to unlocking and unwinding the restrictions on exercise and so on. You're aware of that also, but these are the difficulties. In relation to DOCUS, I know that we spoke in great detail on the Justice Committee about DOCUS, but the overcrowding in DOCUS and the refurbishment that's necessary is very significant. There's an ongoing problem about the profile of people who are there who have overwhelming addiction, mental health and welfare issues, and who, you know, in my view, many of whom should not be there but need to be in supported facilities. I'm not sure what, you know, where the department is moving and whether there's sufficient departmental priority on being able to move to that. We've gone through it in detail in the Justice Committee, but I do just want to highlight it here again. Can I ask you two things? The slopping out, the cost to the state about slopping out and the cases, and we've talked about that, different deputies have talked about that today. I think it was 1.5 million in compensation and another $500,000 in legal costs in respect of in-cell sanitation for 2020 and 2019. Again, it comes with the overcrowding problem, and again, if I go through the Inspector of Prisons reports, and you'll see the one from Arbour Hill, you can see the effect of the double-upped bunk, so a bunk in a single cell with the toilet here, with no screen in between the toilet and the lower bunk, and prisoners report trying to use the toilet on the landing, as it were, for each other's dignity and for each other's, you know. So these are ongoing, very visible, very obvious problems that have to be addressed, particularly where there isn't separate sanitation options. Can I go back to the RMP point? The priority areas, the work and training as an essential service, and that will be prioritised. But that, look, I just want to leave prison for a second. Ms McPhillips, can I go back to the money laundering? That directive came from the EU in 2015. What you said, I think, was that there was a difficulty between July 2017 and 2019 in the transposition of it.
Sorry.
Do you want to just clarify that? I mean, it was a 2015 directive. It should have been implemented by 2017.
Yeah, let me just grab it. Sorry, Deputy. So it wasn't. It should have been implemented by 2017, and it wasn't implemented until December 2019.
But the Department of Justice is very, very good at legislation, particularly criminal justice legislation. It has more expertise within it than many of the other departments. It produces criminal justice legislation all the time. What happened?
There were other priorities, and I agree with the Deputy that this is something that should have been done, but there were other legislative priorities, and as anyone who's on the Justice Committee knows, the volume is absolutely overwhelming. What we've done since then is put in a structure in place to manage the transposition of EU measures, to make sure that we accord them sufficient priority, and that then the Minister can bring them forward in the Dáil in time.
But this wasn't the first EU directive that had to be transposed into legislation in criminal on the criminal justice side? You had experience with that
No,
before?
we've multiples of them, absolutely multiples of them. I might ask Mr. O'Sullivan to come in if that's okay, Deputy, because we have a very complex structure in place now to deliver on the transposition of EU measures.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. Yeah, this is obviously
Very briefly, because I want to go back to Mr. McCullough.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll just say this is a very significant event for us. The only time the state has been fined in the case of a measure we were responsible for implementing. It was a very complex piece of legislation. It introduced entirely new concepts in the area of money laundering. It also involved a lot of engagement, not just with the AG and the usual parties, but with the Department of Finance, the Central Bank, and so on. And we were delayed.
Mr. O'Sullivan, the department would have been involved in the development of the directive at EU level and would have had sight, in a bit like the GDPR piece, had deep knowledge of the directive before it was ever agreed at EU level. Surely this work could be begun at that stage.
Obviously, the work would have begun, but as the Secretary General said, it's part of an overall suite of measures at the department, including perhaps other EU measures which had more pressing timelines even at that point. And I suppose the other complication in this instance is that the department fell foul of a change, or its state fell foul of a change in Commission practice regarding the enforcement of penalties beginning in January 2017. A new policy previously where a member state had remedied the infringement by the time the case came to court, the Commission wouldn't seek a fine, but it changed its practice. So by the time this actually came to court, we had now that's not an excuse, obviously.
No, I appreciate that, yeah, but I understand the context. But we would have been aware of that. But I appreciate the point. But I just want to go back to Ms. McCulloch, because earlier you were saying, and this comment caused me concern. I just want to make sure I understand what you mean. That we're constantly keeping up with money laundering directives. That there were subsequent directives, and just that phrase, constantly keeping up, it sort of raises a very large flag for me, because money laundering, and particularly what we're seeing with Russia and difficulties right across Europe, and our own exposure, even though it's very small. I have those figures from the Department of Finance. I don't like that phrase from your good self, and I wonder if you'd like to clarify or explain. What do you mean?
That's okay. I suppose it just reflects the amount of resource that we have to put into this, Deputy, and we need to, and we absolutely recognise that. We recognise the value of this legislation. We have a range of agencies that have responsibilities under the Money Laundering Act as well. So it's a constant iteration, and the EU will continue to iterate it, and we want them to, because we absolutely have to keep on top of this.
I'd much rather hear that we were keeping ahead of it, that we were leaders in Europe, rather than keeping up with what was going on in the EU and scrambling to keep up. Is the impression I'm getting.
I take that point. It is very demanding, and it is very technical, and it takes a lot of resource. And by the time somebody is up to speed on it, you need to make sure that you have some resilience in terms of our own organisation, in terms of expertise around that, and that can be a challenge as well.
I appreciate that, and you're competing with the private sector in many respects to do that. So I acknowledge that.
No, but I take the point absolutely. Okay. We do absolutely want to be leaders in this space. Yeah.